Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Income Gaming, Cheltenham's premier friendly local game store. Check the link in the description. Before the release of Warhammer The Old World, the Bretonnian Knights on Foot were by far the kit I was most excited to get my hands on. I was lucky enough to be at Warhammer World for the open day, and you could go and build and paint your own, and I was very tempted to, just so I could bring it back, strip it and do a painting tutorial for the channel. But alas, I didn't, and I waited and waited for the release, and when they finally came around and I got my order in, I just had lots of other things in the painting queue. But the time is here. I finally managed to squeeze it into my schedule and build and paint a Knight of the Realm on Foot for the channel. Welcome to Miniature Realms. My name is Stuart, and in this video I will show you just how I did that. So after a usual black prime, I turned to decayed metal through the airbrush, and this is a tried and tested metallic recipe for myself. I've used it on the other knights in my army, so I wanted to remain consistent here. And as most of the miniature was wearing armor, and that was the predominant color, I decided to use the airbrush to get the metallics down and get a really nice finish on those, even though it means I haven't quite got my underpainted zenithal method for all of the softer areas like the cloak and the face and things like that, but we'll work around that. You'll notice I'm deliberately trying to aim from the top of the miniature, leaving the previous colour showing in the undercut. This is building up layers here and giving some extra tonal quality to the finished metallic. The next layer is black metal, and both of these colours are from Scale Colour or Scale 75's Metal Alchemy range. They're lovely metallic paints. They're fantastic with the hairy brush, and with a tiny little bit of thinning they go through the airbrush very well as well. And finally we finish with some Game Air Silver, and this is the brightest silver, again aiming from the top much more, catching the light. So not only have you got the different tonal qualities of the three different metallics, you're also working from top down where the light would hit and cause the reflection the most. And there we have the knight in its metallic stages. If you could tip it upside down, you'd see it's a lot darker and a lot of that brown metallic showing through, but we're ready for the next stage. Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. I've used some blue grey from model colour to blank back out those areas that aren't metals. Those of you who regularly watch the channel will know that I like to do an underpainting method or zenithal highlight through the airbrush first and finishing with a dry brush. So I'm doing a bit of a replication with that, just with the hairy brush here, and I'm going back with a wood of white grey as well, just to pick out some of the areas on the nose and cheekbones on the face. Also finishing with a dry brush over the larger areas of the miniature as well, really trying to pick out the edges, the tops of the folds in the clothing, and really lighting it up. This is so that when I do my next layers, which will be using contrast style paints, I will get the benefit of them and they form a nice outline from which I can highlight on top afterwards. The first of those colours is Cygor Brown from Citadel Colour. This is a deepish brown with sort of reddish undertones, and it's really nice for a mid-tone leather, a nice dark, well-oiled looking leather. I'm using this for the turnbacks on the leather boots, as well as for his belt and gloves and the leather wrapping on his great weapon. Now on to contrast Nazdrag Yellow. The colours for my army are yellow and blue, mostly in a half-based livery colour scheme. So this half of the fabric at the back of his knight here is going to be in yellow, but I'll follow it up onto the other areas of the miniature as well. There's an awful lot going on the helmet, so you can choose a little bit which bits you colour. I've decided to make this bit yellow here, and I will half the little flag on the back as well. And for the blue, I'm using a Vallejo Express colour, and it's a Mega Blue, and the Express colour is Vallejo's own version of contrast paints, and this is a nice rich blue that I need to smooth out a little bit on the flatter areas because it will pull if I'm not careful, but I'm using this as that base layer. A most important part of it is how rich it is in the recesses, because that will form a really nice base layer to work from. Follow this around on all of the other areas of the livery that need some colour. That of course includes many of those details on the helmet. Using dwarf skin from its best colour for the face on the knight, and this matches the colour I've been using in my army, so it's consistent. I could have just painted in with a flat fresh colour, which you can see later on as I go into the highlighting stage, but I wanted to add as many of the colours I've been using as possible to make sure the army is consistent. To maintain that further, I'm using gloomy violet and deep purple here, and I'll add them into the recesses of the skin, into the sockets around the nose, around the chin and things like that, and it really adds some tonal depth to the flesh, just very, very lightly adding little bits in, mainly where the shadow is, and a little bit of the redder colour in the eyes and around the nose, just adds a little bit of more warmth and depth and realism to the skin tone. There's quite a lot of little extra details on the knight, and I'm using some Viking gold here from that same metallics range, just picking out the fleur-de-lis and a few of the other details. Now if you look at the box art, the knights have an incredible amount of detail on each of the helmets, and a lot of the helmets, those things aren't painted as metallic, they're painted as real, as if they're real accoutrements on the top of their helmets and things. So it's up to you what you do. I didn't want to make them look any more gaudy than they already are, so I tend to stick to metallics on my own regiment. There's no reason at all that you'd have to pick out all of these areas in gold. You could leave them just as silver metallic as well. Now this is the champion. I want to make sure that he looks a little bit posher than some of the others, and the main focus very much is the steel armor, but I did want to pick out a few of the bits in gold as well. The most outlandish bit is this large design on the top of the helmet itself, and again if you look at the box cover art, this is painted as not a metallic colour. It's painted as it's either been painted, I'm not sure what it's supposed to be, whether it's supposed to be painted metal or carved out of wood. Either way, I'm sure it's pretty unwieldy on the top of his helmet, but I've decided to make it metallic all the same, or at least metal plated. I'm sure it wouldn't be solid gold, it would snap his neck. It's also useful to break at the metallics a little bit just by picking out little extra details like this. To highlight that Viking gold, we're using elven gold. Just working my way around, adding little highlights where the light would catch the most. To highlight the leather areas, we base coated in Cygor brown. We have Hull red and German camo pale brown from Model Color. This is another one familiar to you if you watch a lot of my tutorials and seen a few of my brown recipes. I really like the way this works with the Cygor brown. Just a few edge highlights on the boots and towards the front, then on the knuckles of the gloves, and the little details along the handle of the great weapon as well. It's also worth doing a few on the belt to make it stand out a little bit more, before returning with the pale brown for some extra thin highlights, and those really show up nicely along the tops and the bottoms of these overflaps on the boots. You could add a few little marks and dinks and scratches in the leather as well. Just running my brush along the side here, picking out some of those edge details around the handle of the great weapon. I'm just getting the very front of this line here, not all the way around, just where the light would catch the most. And then back to the same Cygor brown again, this time thinned 50-50 with water. I've made a glaze and I'm just going back down and blending those layers in so they're not quite as stark, and it really just ties it in nicely. This is another one of the benefits of doing base layers with contrast style paints, is because they make fantastic glazes which are just perfect to tone back down and really blend back into that base layer again. Just using a little bit of white grey here to tidy up the moustaches a little bit that had a little bit of overspill from the flesh colours. And while I have the white colour out, I'm just painting in the eyeballs at the same time. Decided to make this man a venerable old chap, so I'm adding some apothecary white to those moustaches, which is essentially a bit like a grey glaze or a wash, and it just darkens it slightly so we can highlight later on. I turn now to two thin coats, Dark Sun Yellow, Skulker Yellow and Yellow Flame. Now these look a little bit pastel, but it's very much the bottles. I'll just to show you here, when you hold the bottles up to the colours on the palette, it's much more vibrant on the palette. Now, those of you who watched my earlier Bretonnian tutorials for this paint scheme will know that I didn't use those colours at all. I used Citadel colours, so I'm trying out something different here, and the colours are almost exact matches anyway to the colours that I previously used, or at least give the same effect. So I decided I wanted to try some different colours, and as it was a different unit, I thought it was pretty safe to do, so even if the shade was ever so slightly different, but I think this works just as well, and I'll probably be using these for the rest of the army now. So I'm just starting off with that darkest shade, which works really well with the Nasdaq yellow as a base tone. Very thin coats, building it up, leaving plenty of the darker colour showing underneath. Then I slowly move up into the mid-tone, lightening all the way I go, working from that top highlight down so I can blend in and make sure it's relatively smooth. And by the time we get to that top highlight, it just really starts to pop, using the edge of my brush here just to catch the edge of the detail of the miniature. Exactly the same method on the larger, flatter areas, focusing from the top highlight first, thin the paint nicely, blend it back in and feather it out into the darker colour, but still leaving each of the previous shades. And as we get to the top colour in the triad, just a nice little thin line, and it really just makes it pop and stand out. And then, like I did with the Cygor brown, and returning to the Nasdaq yellow, adding it to the palette, a little bit of water so it's a 50-50 mix. I'm just using it as a glaze, adding it first to the darkest areas, which is where it was used as a base coat, and slowly blending and feathering it up, working my way to the brightest areas. And if you knock it back a bit too much, you can always go back with the regular paint and re-highlight, but I just find this ties it in really nicely, adds a little bit of a smoother gradient to it. And again, glazing is just so easy with contrast style paints. To highlight the blue layers, we have Model Colour Royal Blue and Fantasy Games from Scale Colour and Marth Blue. Exactly the same method as we used on the yellow, so I'm focusing on the higher areas, on the top edges, a little bit of a thicker highlight line for the mid-tone, which is the Royal Blue. It's fairly straightforward on the more pronounced areas of detail, so focusing on those top ridges of the cloth, be that at the back or at the front here, that's hanging down between his legs. As we move on to the flatter areas, you want to spend a little bit more time with your paint, thin a bit more to make sure those transitions are smooth, using the Amath Blue here to really highlight towards the top of those flat areas. Then of course along the top areas of detail, like the little flag on his helmet, seems a strange thing to say, just a thin line there separating up the halved colour, just really makes it pop and stand out. Just like we did with the yellow, we're returning to the base colour, a Mega Blue from Vallejo Express Colour in this instance, thinning 50% with water just on the wet palette there, and using it to glaze back into the shadows, feathering out and blending up into the detail, and it just really smooths it out and ties it all in. You can even do it on these smaller areas of detail, just focusing where it's a little bit darker towards the bottom or at the centre of these fabric pieces, blending it out, and it just looks a little bit smoother and neater. Back to the skin, and we have Barbarian Brawn, Dwarven Skin and Elven Skin from the Too Thin Coats range. I've recently started using this, and it's a really nice companion to the Dwarf Skin Vallejo Express Colour paint, which is great because it's something I'm using a lot at the moment. The mid-tone highlights nicely over the Dwarf Skin base colour, especially when you've added those extra tones of the gloomy violet and the deep purple. Though if you do need to start a little bit darker or go back to dark, then the Barbarian Brawn works very well with it at the same time, and then that top highlight of the Elven Skin is perfect, so it just works really well hand in hand with those other colours. Essentially what you want to do is focus on the raised areas at the tops of the nose, top of the cheekbone, and then on the chin, and then go back with that top highlight and repeat the same but a smaller area, and you've got those layers. So back to that white grey now from Model Colour, and we're just going to spend a little bit of time highlighting the edge of the moustaches and the little bit of hair that's showing on the edge of the helmet. And now for something that many of you will be familiar with if you've watched a lot of my videos, I'm using an oil wash instead of a standard wash like an Agrax Earth shade. I'm using grease here, which is quite a subtle sepia-ish tone, and it's from the Soilworks range from Scale Colour. I'm just using this all over the metallics, focusing though on the ridges and on the crevices, and letting it run into all that detail. And as it's an oil wash, it's super easy to clean off the flat surfaces afterwards, which I will also show you. When it dries, it leaves you a nice deposit that looks like it's sort of grained in dirt and looks a little bit more mucky and realistic. But the main thing is that it doesn't stick to those surface areas and leave you with any streaking, and it gives you a much nicer look, in my opinion. I'm not covering the basing here, I have before, but I'm also using it on my bases at the moment, and it just goes perfectly over the texturing and over this kitty litter that I'm using without any other work. Now, by using some artist's white spirit and an old brush, the same as I used to apply the oil wash, I'm just using a little bit of it just to clean the flat surfaces on the metallic areas, and it takes it back to its shine, but leaves all of that oil wash in all those crevices, which gives you the shading that you require, but also that grimy look as well. So you get this really, really high shine metallic finish, but with good shadowing and good sort of dirt and ingrained in the recesses to make it look realistic, and I love the effect. Now we're returning to those top highlight metallic colors again, the same we used earlier in the video. And I'm just making sure that where the light is catching on the metallic areas, that it's still extra shiny and pops, because once we've added that oil wash, as much as we've removed most of it from those top surfaces, it does still filter and dull it slightly, which is good in some areas or in most areas, but I really want to add a little bit of shine back to it as well. And this Game Air Silver is really robust. You can thin it with water very, very well and feather and blend out, and a lot of metallics don't like that, and it just shows how good it is as a paint. It's really, really easy to do that with, so I'm just adding a little line along where the top highlight might be, and then just moistening the brush and just feathering and blending it out, and it works so well with this metallic paint. I did take a little bit of time working my way around where the light would be shining on the most sort of open surfaces, and just adding a little line, like I said, moistening the brush and feathering it out. You don't need to do this at all. The metallic does look pretty good without it, but as the unit champion, and I wanted his armor to look pretty shiny, I thought it was probably worth the effort. Very much the same method as well with the Elven Gold, a little bit less of the moistening and feathering out because they're smaller areas, so just focusing where the light would hit in the extremities more here, and it just adds that little bit of vibrancy back. And there he is, all finished, and I think that's quite a nice high tabletop standard. Some techniques a little bit more advanced than others, but nothing that's at competition style level, so anyone that's a really high-end painter won't find anything stressful there at all. But those of us that are more of a middle level painter will no doubt find that those things are achievable, or if you've not quite got to some of those techniques yet, they're well within your grasp. So do push yourself and try some of those if you haven't already. I really enjoyed painting this miniature. The sculpts are very, very nice and clean. They're on the large size. They're definitely bigger than the standard men-at-arms. They look quite big against them, which is in some ways isn't too much of a problem, them being strong knights and all. But even against the new resin foot knight, they do seem a little bit larger, so that surprised me. I guess they'd be larger, but these are a little bit larger even than that. I imagine they scale quite well with some of the Age of Sigmar miniatures, but still absolutely fantastic sculpts. Really like them, and they're going to be sitting on their own as a unit anyway, so I can't really see looking out of place on the tabletop. I need to get the rest of them built and painted now, but I'm looking forward to fielding them in a game. And if any of you had used them, have you used them with great weapons? That's what I'm going with as a build. How have you got on with them? How have you found them in your armies? I'll be really interested to hear in the comments below, and also let me know how you've painted them, what colour schemes you've used, all good stuff. I'd love to hear about it in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, please do consider giving it a like, subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Do check out the other videos if you are also new. There's loads of Warhammer the Old World content. Much of it is painting tutorial or painting style videos, including terrain and things as well, but there's a lot of other things as well, some discussion, some feature videos and things. And I do love Warhammer the Old World and Warhammer Fantasy in general. It's probably my biggest wargaming love, and there's lots of it on the channel because of it. However, there are many other things as well, and if you have a little snoop around, you'll see everything from some 40k videos to legions to loads of historical things as well. So there should be plenty of things to suit many different wargaming tastes. Everyone is welcome. There's a link in the video description to the channel's Discord. It's a really nice friendly place where you can talk about any of those games I've listed, pretty much anything that's wargame related under the sun. So do head over there if you fancy joining in with a very friendly community. And if you'd like to support the channel further, I do have a Patreon as well, so there's also a link from that. Have a click and have a little look there. There's painting tuition at the higher end included, and at the lower end it's just very much a thank you to the channel to help me keep doing what I'm doing. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.